The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to our webinar presentation of how sales and operations planning can help manufacturers plan and recover from COVID-19. My name is Brittany Langford, and I'm the marketing coordinator here at MCA Connect. And with me here is Howard Honedale. He's been with Connect for 5 years and is managing director of our business transformation practice, which includes our S&OP services. Today's presentation should run about 20-25 minutes with a few questions or a few minutes left at the end for questions. All right, and so Howard, I'll pass it off to you to get started.
Okay, thank you, Brittany. So today we're talking about sales and operation planning and really in the pandemic, what now and what's next. Everybody see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay,
Sure.
so let's talk a little bit about our impact on sales. So we know our traditional kind of hockey stick forecast, we have this magic period where our sales really takes off. And what we've seen with COVID is for certain products, that's gone even more of a dramatic takeoff. And then of course, for other products, there's really been no magic, and they've either flatlined or completely gone to zero. So the impact we've seen really is from kind of a centralized command and control to a more decentralized or networked or distributed control. And that shift has just happened naturally as people have had to work from home. The real question is, how do we organize this? There's some activities in the supply chain that are naturally kind of lend themselves to a centralized organization. And there's other activities and processes that are really more at a local or more at a distributed level. We talk about the problems that have kind of crept up. There's three major areas as the biggest problems. The first being really customer disruption and the demand side of things. The second being the supplier disruption, which has really led to some stockouts. And then finally, the operations disruption really in support of the above. So the first major disruption is really towards customers. And the impacts have been pretty severe. For certain customer demands and products, there's been huge spikes, and some of these spikes are like 10 times the normal peak volume, and that's day after day after day. Other products, there's really zero demand, and we've seen some A movers even become C movers overnight. This results in delays in shipments, rushing for specific items or orders to try to meet that demand. That results in some increase in customer service calls. And of course, there's been an increase in home delivery. And a lot of those companies, or a lot of companies really aren't ready for that home delivery. So that's outstripped their capability or capacity to really to meet those. So what's that resulted in? Well, in some loyalty loss. So customers are now kind of shopping around for some other alternatives. They need those products and they need them now. So the capacity to replenish those products has been a lot more difficult. We've seen this kind of whiplash effect in the supply chain because, of course, our suppliers are customers of another supplier, and that just continues down the train or chain. So this really can result in a whiplash effect. And as a result, some costs have escalated. What a lot of people don't know is a small increase in inventory or transportation costs can really be a huge increase in overall supply chain costs, and that really affects your cost to serve that customer. So that affects your future sales. So what are our solutions? What can we do about this? Well, the first thing is we need to track actual consumption versus kind of our historical sales numbers that we've used. So we want to focus on those key customers, and we really probably need to avoid our traditional forecasting and really try to capture live consumption where that's happening. We probably need to increase the cadence of our S&OP and our product reviews. I mean, not probably, this is really necessary in terms of the demand changes that we've seen. So we need to consolidate the products, and we really need to identify those high-risk stock shortage items. We really need to act as a multi-channel supplier to our customers wherever possible. So we need to consider drop shipping over shipping out of our DCs. We need to consolidate freight with other suppliers where necessary. introduce home delivery if that's something we haven't done, and really share in any kind of new distribution opportunities that we uncover with any of our partners. Third thing is we need a lot more visibility. So that focus on those strategic suppliers, we realize that the current systems may not be able to cope with what's happened overnight. So that means we need to increase communications in terms of how often and how much, and really let's focus those SKUs on what the real movers are right now. Probably means we need a more frequent S&OP cycle and more frequent production changeovers. So what's the focus for the customers? It's really about tracking actual consumption, acting multi-channel on delivering to those customers, and over communicating. The need really is higher service and lower costs. You know, we don't want to get caught with a lot of expedite cost charges. So what's our action plan for customers? We need a weekly S&OP to capture true demand. We need to rationalize our SKUs. We really want to look for the A++ movers that are happening right now. We want to establish the alternative distribution channels to get those products to our customers. We want to create some more rapid communications with our actual customers and the suppliers that are following through on those orders. Basically, we want to run faster and keep it as simple as possible. We know you probably rationalize SKUs today, and so hopefully you have a good strategy for doing that. What happens when something like this pandemic, we see that certain products like your A movers, really we could say you get A++ movers. And so it's even more slim than what we see here in terms of the products that are performing well. And a lot of times the B's, C's, and D's fall off the list, or there could be a C item that all of a sudden became essential and now is an A item. But to quickly identify those A+ items, and you probably see these kind of graphs of A, B, and C movers. In a pandemic, a lot of times the B and C movers completely go to zero, and there's really no shipment of those. So the key is to really focus on what are the products that are actually moving, and what's the plan to organize the company around that. You should already have a formal S&OP planning cycle, and really you really need to think about, is a month cycle, is that enough right now? And it probably isn't. We probably need to look at more like a weekly cycle. So that brings us to the second big disruption, which is really with our suppliers. And what's happened to those guys? Well, obviously there's been shortage for the supplies where there's spikes of products, and a surplus where there's been no demand for products. This means, of course, delivery times have increased, delays, there's cancellations, inconsistent supply, pressure from single source suppliers, there's shutdowns, get any kind of resupply from overseas. We can't book ship capacity to get overseas supplies, increased buying and ad hoc purchase. That means in terms of cost, lack of warehouse space, now taken up by these slow movers or non-movers, and not enough room for those A++ movers. So we end up with more out of stock issues overall. Our inventory is really out of balance with the demand. We have dead stock that's really taking up space that's needed for those spike demand products. We have an overflow of warehousing space that's really required for those fast movers. We probably haven't optimized the staff to deal with that. We have some cost and service impacts as a result of that. So what are we going to do? What's our solution? Well, we need to diversify our supplier base as much as possible. We got to focus on those key strategic suppliers. We got to review our supplier spread, ensure any multi-country capabilities and internationals are covered, and we need to verify their performance on a more frequent basis. If they're monthly, they need to be weekly. If they're weekly, they need to be daily. Speed to market has to be a lot more quicker. We need to consider all transport modes if we haven't done that. Multi-speed replenishment based on need. So depending, we may need to look at different areas and different ways that we need to expedite product in. But basically, we need to plan ahead, and we need to look at the increase in home deliveries and what that impact has on the supply chain overall, and how that affects our ability to deliver. So that focus for suppliers is really about visibility, about speed to market, and diversity. We need higher service in times like this and lower costs. So really our action plan is to assess those top suppliers, and it may even be less than 20%. It may be like your top 5 or 10 suppliers. Establish demand by volume, by channel, rationalize those products, find those A+ movers quickly, gain visibility company-wide with the weekly S&OP meetings. Basically, we're looking for a consistent supply and higher service to deliver that supply. So we know we're trying to predict what happens in the supply chain. And, you know, it starts with visibility. We have to have our what if scenarios in S&OP, and that's really where we minimize our risk. And we're ready. We know what to do when these problems occur. That's really what drives a sustainable supply chain. And many people were taken off guard with kind of this predictability. People don't do enough what if scenario planning. We know the impact on supply chain costs. We already talked about this. A couple % move can really affect things. And really what we're talking about when we talk about cost for a customer is the total cost to serve. This is what we need to look at to understand really how good are these customers for the business overall. A lot of people look at landed or cost to deliver. It doesn't include enough, and you can kind of fool yourself in terms of the profitability that you're making. You need to look at customers again when these kind of things happen, because the shift changes based on the way your supply chain contracts and expands. So we're really always looking for that profitability out of customers. We shouldn't be doing things in the supply chain that takes away from our profitability because we don't really understand the effect. The other side of this with suppliers is really that evaluation and certification. Everybody should have scorecards, and if you don't, you can certainly see an improvement just from using one. But really, when something like this pandemic happens, we need to look at new criteria for our suppliers. So we may have a way that we evaluate our suppliers that works very well for a normal course of business, but when things happen suddenly, we may need to think of strategic suppliers and their ability to react as being really the important criteria that jump ahead of maybe our traditional criteria that we use. When we talk about S&OP, so sales and operations planning, every company, it's just how formalized do they do it? Well, what we're saying is that needs to be more formalized, and it needs to be able to be reactionary for sudden changes. So as demand comes in, we want to look at that actual consumption much more than the forecast with times like this. And then we'll go through our standard kind of functions of looking at the demand, looking at the supply side of things, doing that integration, that financial analysis and review, putting dollars towards units, do what if scenario planning, and giving the executives the ability to make the right decisions for the business. And that brings us to the third area of disruption, which is really the business operations. So what have we seen in terms of the impact? Well, we have more volumes for certain items, which require more staff for those items. And then, of course, we have too many staff for the items that don't have the kind of demand we're used to. That's overloaded the call centers. It's overloaded our systems. There's been just a general lack of understanding and demand management and our systems to cope with this kind of stuff. The inability to manage our assets during these downturns are always difficult overall. That's resulted in poor customer service levels, decrease in our ability to deliver to customers. Unfortunately, that means in some cases, some businesses have lost some market share or even gone out of business. That brings a drop of staff morale overall. So what's our solution? How do we fix this with the staff and the way we're operating? Well, we need to simplify quickly as fast as possible. So we need to identify that mission critical stages and processes. We really need to redeploy our resources and staff to really fit those critical activities. We know people are working from home, and so the plan has to keep that work from home kind of in mind in terms of how we're going to be able to deal with this. Internally, you probably want to have a one-page health check. We have an offering on this if you haven't already done this, but really just to keep everybody in contact with what's going on kind of day to day to have that real-time update. You need to add flexibility in terms of the working hours. Obviously, personal protection and safety for on-site staff is important, but we need to look at flexibility in how we do our processes, in minimum order quantities, in all kinds of areas of the business that maybe we haven't considered in the past. Thirdly, we need to increase our control and visibility. We need to increase just communications in general because people are not in touch as much as they are used to being in touch. And so we talked about the one-page status check that can also have areas specific to particular departments. We need to understand what the actual customer demand is, where our stock positions are, and we need to have that reactive S&OP to be able to deal with things on the run. We know that there's a potential for shutdowns in in manufacturing, in DC. We need to have a plan for that. We need to understand what are we going to do when those things happen. How do we react? So our focus is really simplify overall, keep things as flexible as possible, and keep those controls while doing it. And that really the needs are about stability, consistency, and that's all about decreasing stress on the staff. So what's our action plan? What can we do with the organization to really deal with this? First of all, we got to define that critical path in the supply chain so we understand who's affected and where we need to put our resources. We need to have our resources, and we have to have backup resources to those resources in case something happens. They may get sick. And so we're always doing the what if scenarios of how we're going to deal with this. We need to plan for our node shutdowns, whether it's DC, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's corporate, whether it's our systems. We need to think through these things and what we're going to do to react to them. We need that real-time organizational status so everybody knows what's going on. People aren't coming into work if they're working from home. They still want to know, what am I supposed to do today? Is the company okay? What's happening? Just some simple communications can really help people and make them feel a little more certain about where things are headed, even though, in general, things are not certain. You need to think strategically about what's next. So we got to really think strategically about what can happen and what we're going to do if those things do happen. Basically, provide that stability, minimize the stress, provide some consistency to people. That helps people feel like, okay, this was unexpected, but we have a plan on how to deal with this. So now that brings us really to S&OP. You've heard me mention this in demand from customers, in the actual supply, in our production, in our manufacturing. So what is S&OP excellence? Well, S&OP is really the engine that runs the business. Apex definition, a process that provides management the ability to strategically direct its business to achieve competitive advantage on a continuous basis. So that really says it all, but it's really an executive level decision-making process about the volume and mix and the products that you're going to actually bring to market. Basically, it's tying all the different plans that exist in the company into one plan, into one set of numbers that everybody agrees on and runs on. So it's really the tactical forum for executing the strategic plan of the business. That's what S&OP is all about. As the engine that runs your business, it takes input from sales and marketing, from operations in terms of how we do things and get things done, from finance, so the analysis and what if planning, and then finally from our new products to serve new markets. The executive S&OP forum is really where we reconcile, align, and communicate the game plan of the business. How that relates to the operation plan? Well, we have our demand planning, which is really our sales forecast. We have on the right side the supplier planning, which is really dealing with our vendors and how our supply comes in the door. And then we have our volume and our mix, our different products that we're actually delivering, and our capabilities that happens through our master scheduling, our plant and supplier scheduling, and our distribution scheduling. All of this interacts together back and forth with communications, really to come up with the right mix for what it is that we're doing based on our yearly business plan. So typically you have your yearly business plan, your S&OP is your monthly plan, your weekly gets into your master schedule, and then your daily is more in that production planning. So as we go through that, we have inputs that go into your S&OP process, and out from that you get your PSI plan. That PSI plan, along with a number of other items, goes into your master scheduler overall, and this gives you your planned orders. Those planned orders, along with a bunch of other information, goes into your production scheduler, and that actually creates your work orders. And then finally, at more of kind of the tactical plant level, we have our management staff that really helps us execute those work orders, execute the work that we have to get done to actually fulfill the needs. So that just kind of ties it in all the way down to the ground level. So what is the high level flow? Well, we need to understand how the frequency of what it is that we're doing. The typical frequency is monthly. Like I said, that may need to be increased during this time. We distribute that assumption package to all the stakeholders. So that talks about all the business rules, who the stakeholders that own those business rules are, what the forecast impacts are, upsides, downsides, new product introductions, end of life, key resources, all the information basically that makes up the actual numbers and gives you the intelligence that you need to have a fruitful discussion. Typically, it starts with demand in week 1. Week 2 is all about supply. Week 3 is about the what if analysis, putting the dollars to the units. And then week 4 is the final executive sign off. So the whole point of this is it happens every month, and this is just the cadence. This is the way the business runs. If that's something that's already established, then it's easier to say, hey, we need to increase the pace on this. We need to do this weekly, and or there are always areas that you can increase for kind of immediate calls and things, and those things will happen as well as part of the normal cycle. So what are the benefits in S&OP? There's a lot of things that you maximize, like profit, customer service, the utilization or operations of your equipment. And there's a number of items that you can really reduce: costs, inventory, changes in production rates, and work levels. But really, if you look at some numbers, this is a study from IBM, S&OP, there's reason not to do this and formalize this. Lots of benefits for actually implementing this and doing this, including top line revenue growth of 2 to 5%. So if you aren't doing SOP as a practice, great time to really formalize it. What we try to help do is get you to that your level of S&OP. And that's where everybody understands the processes that are fully integrated into the way you do business. They're driven from the highest level with the senior executive team. They have all the information they need. It's real time, it's accurate at their fingertips with analysis, and all the systems support that up and down the value chain. So we can talk about that in the supply chain, but that's what our goal is, to drive you to that level. Now, why or when doesn't S&OP deliver? You know, really, if there's a lack of executive ownership, the S&OP isn't going to be successful internally. It's really the executive team that leads this. If there's no cross-functional management support, it's about aligning all the different divisions, areas in the business. Focusing only on one consensus number. This is a big problem. It's just planning for your expected case. You need to, the worst case and the best case, you need to do some what if scenario planning. Complexity, this needs to be simple. Everybody needs to understand what it is and how it works. If it's too complex, it's not going to work. If you have too much information, you're going to have a dilution effect. So there's the right way to set the information to make this a very productive meeting. And of course, if you don't document all the assumptions and everything that goes into the decisions, you're not going to have the support that you need to make those right decisions. We have a number of questions, and these questions really are all solved by S&OP solutions. So if information is not readily available, if there's not a clear understanding of priorities in the business, if we don't have a clear defined operational strategy, we probably need a more formal S&OP solutions. We have firefighting, we have superheroes that fix things. There's more finger pointing than collaboration, or maybe our performance is just stagnant. We don't have continual improvement. All of those things are reasons that you can formalize S&OP to really drive that business to the numbers and things that you expect. So what do we offer from an assessment standpoint? Well, there's a lot of things that we cover when we come in and do an assessment. An assessment is basically a 2-week process that we do to come in and basically look at all the areas in terms of how you run S&OP and make some recommendations for what you can do in the future. For us, this is about an 80-hour process, so about 2 weeks of billable time to do that. And we come up with 3 different areas as kind of the output. First, what are the immediate opportunities that we can do right away? Second, what do we need to do in your current enterprise systems to enable this even more? And then third, the actual implementation and support of that design and implementation process. So if we just look at the design after those quick hits, that's usually about a month's worth of effort to look at your current systems and make sure we have all the right kinds of information so that you can have the kind of fruitful meeting that you need in your S&OP forum. And then finally, the full implementation really depends on the system that you guys have, and typically that runs, 300 to 400 hours to do that. Now, we prefer to do this stuff during a ERP implementation if you have that going on, because it's kind of the natural springboard to say, hey, now's the time to do things in a much more formal basis. But we can do S&OP at any time. It has some hooks into the current systems, but it's kind of an independent process. So it requires tool sets and things to function, and to really bring it to that high level stage of what you're looking for in S&OP. But you can start without that. You can start with just the meetings and getting the information. So our process is really about getting you to that leadership level of S&OP and driving business performance. And that really is the end of our presentation on S&OP. So I just wanted to open it up for any questions that we have from any of our participation members.
Perfect. Thank you, Howard. It doesn't look like any questions have come through, but I'm just thinking out loud here. In order to be successful with the S&OP process, do companies need to be on D365, or what system? Does it matter what system they're on? Or
yeah, you don't need to be on D365. Any company that is running does sales and operations planning. You have to look at the demand from your customers and satisfy that with your suppliers. So, but to really be an excellent operating organization, we want it integrated with your systems. And the ERP systems are the systems, the ERP and the FP&A and the, if you're running any kind of business intelligence systems, those are the systems that we work with that give us the information that we need to run S&OP. But we really define all the business rules, and it gets all the way down to production scheduling and scheduling across the supply chain. So we can start very simply, and we can start with whatever systems that you have. But our goal is really that high level, fully integrated S&OP process supported by the enterprise systems that are currently in place.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you. And then if someone's interested in this S&OP assessment, how would one get started? What's the process look like for that?
Sure. So contact us and we can have a more personalized one-on-one conversation with you about where you're at in S&OP and what you're looking to do. And then we'll turn around a SAL, and usually about a week. That won't take us too long to get together. And then when we get signature back from our clients, it takes us about 2 weeks to get that staffed, and then we'll be off to the races.
Perfect. Sounds good. Still no questions, so I think we're good. Thank you, Howard, and thank you for everyone for joining. This was recorded, so it'll be sent out and it'll be uploaded, uploaded on our website for everyone's reference. So cool.
All right. Thank you, everyone.